When you're driving the loneliest road in America, you learn to appreciate any company you can get. That's what I thought, anyway, until I joined a convoy that shouldn't have existed. I'm Luke Henderson, and I've been running freight across Nevada for 12 years. Most drivers avoid Highway 50 if they can help it. They call it the loneliest road in America for good reason. 370 miles of empty desert between Carson City and Ely, with maybe 5 towns worth mentioning along the way. But the pay is good, and I've always preferred solitude to traffic jams. That February night in 2024, I was hauling a load of mining equipment from Reno to a copper operation outside of Ely. The weather had been clear all day, but around sunset, a thick fog started rolling in from the west. By the time I reached Austin, visibility was down to maybe 30 yards. I'd driven Highway 50 inches every kind of weather, but this fog was different, thicker, more persistent than anything I'd seen before. I was running about 25 miles per hour, hazards flashing, when I crested a small hill east of Austin and saw taillights ahead. 3 sets of them, spaced evenly, moving at roughly the same speed I was. Other truckers, smart enough to slow down in the soup. The relief was immediate. Safety in numbers, especially in conditions like this. I keyed my CB radio, looking for chatter. Breaker 1 to 9. This is Freight Dog coming up behind 3 rigs eastbound on Highway 50. Y'all got your ears on? Static for a moment. Then a gravelly voice crackled through. Copy that, Freight Dog. Welcome to the convoy. We're taking it nice and slow until this clears up. Much appreciated. Mind if I tag along? Negative problem. Fall in behind and keep your distance. We'll get through this together. I settled in behind the 3rd truck, maintaining a safe following distance. The fog swirled around us like living smoke, occasionally thinning enough to reveal glimpses of the desert landscape before closing in again. The convoy moved at a steady pace, maybe 30 miles per hour now, and I found myself relaxing for the first time since the weather turned. That's when I started noticing things that didn't make sense. The truck directly ahead of me was an older Kenworth, probably from the 1980s, with a distinctive paint scheme. The dark blue cab with silver flames along the sides. The trailer was a standard dry van, but something about its proportions looked off. Too long, maybe, or sitting too low on the axles. I'd been following it for maybe 20 minutes when the fog parted briefly, and I got a clear look at the trailer doors. They were secured with heavy chains and multiple padlocks. Not unusual for valuable cargo, but the chains looked old, rusty, like they'd been in place for years. Breaker, this is Freight Dog, I called into the CB. What kind of freight you hauling that needs all that security? The same gravelly voice responded. Mind your own business, driver. Just keep following. Something about his tone made my skin crawl. I backed off a little more, putting extra distance between us. Through the fog, I could see the lead truck in the convoy, maybe a quarter mile ahead. Its taillights seemed brighter than they should be, casting an unnatural red glow that penetrated the mist. We drove like that for another hour, the convoy maintaining its steady pace through the endless fog. I started to wonder where we were. Highway 50 between Austin and Eureka was familiar territory, but nothing looked right. The hills were too steep, the curves too sharp. It was like we'd somehow veered onto a different road entirely. How much farther to Eureka? I asked over the radio. No response. Just empty static. I tried again. Convoy. This is Freight Dog. How much farther to Eureka? This time, a different voice answered. Younger, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Not much farther now. Stay with us. But that wasn't the voice that had welcomed me into the convoy. I'd been talking to one driver, and now someone else was responding. How many people were in this convoy? I counted the taillights ahead of me again. Still 3 trucks, spaced evenly through the fog, but the voices on the radio didn't match up. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the February air. I was reaching for my GPS when the truck ahead of me started changing. The blue paint with silver flames was still there, but now I could see rust eating through the metal around the wheel wells. The trailer looked even more wrong than before. Not just long, but warped somehow, like it had been in an accident and never properly repaired. The chains on the back doors were definitely rusty now. Ancient, corroded links that looked like they might crumble at a touch. And there was something else, a smell drifting back through the fog, sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in a vase. "This is Freight Dog," I called on the CB, my voice tighter than I wanted. "I need to take an exit. I got to check something on my load." The gravelly voice came back immediately. "Negative, Freight Dog. No exits for miles. Stay with the convoy." But that was wrong. I knew this stretch of highway, and there should have been a rest area coming up soon. I'd stopped there dozens of times over the years. Where was it? The fog seemed to be getting thicker instead of clearing. My headlights barely penetrated 10 feet ahead now, and the convoy's taillights were the only reference points I had. Without them, I'd be completely blind. That's when I heard the third voice on the radio. A woman this time, speaking in a flat monotone. "You can't leave now. Luke Henderson, you're part of the convoy." My blood turned to ice. I'd never given them my name. I grabbed the CB mic with shaking hands. "Who is this? How do you know my name?" Laughter echoed through the static. Not one voice, but several, overlapping and distorted. The sound made my teeth ache. I had to get out of there. Convoy or no convoy, fog or no fog, I was not staying with these trucks another mile. I started to ease over toward what I hoped was the right shoulder, but the truck ahead of me suddenly slowed, forcing me to brake hard. "Stay in formation, Freight Dog," the gravelly voice commanded. "Wouldn't want you to get lost out here." The blue Kenworth had slowed to maybe 15 miles per hour now, keeping pace with me as I tried to change lanes. Every time I moved right, it moved with me, blocking my path to the shoulder. In my mirrors, I could see another set of headlights closing in from behind. I was boxed in. Panic started setting in. The convoy was herding me, keeping me trapped in formation like some kind of prison. The fog pressed in from all sides, and those red taillights ahead were the only light in a world gone dark and wrong. "Let me out of here," I called on the radio, not caring how desperate I sounded. More laughter. Then the woman's voice again. "You joined the convoy, Luke. Now you're one of us." That's when I saw the rest area. It materialized out of the fog like a mirage, appearing suddenly on the right side of the highway. The old familiar sign, Hickison Summit Rest Area. Next right. I'd stopped there 100 times, knew every picnic table and trash barrel. Without warning, I yanked the steering wheel hard right, breaking free from the convoy's formation. The blue Kenworth tried to follow, but I had momentum and desperation on my side. My rig bounced and shuddered as I hit the exit ramp, air brakes screaming in protest. Behind me, I heard engines roaring, the sound of the convoy trying to follow. But the exit was narrow, designed for cars and smaller vehicles. The lead truck tried to make the turn and couldn't, its trailer swinging wide and blocking the other vehicles. I didn't stop to watch. I gunned it up the ramp and into the rest area, parking under the first light I could find. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely shift into park. The rest area was empty except for my rig. No cars, no other trucks, just weathered picnic tables and a small brick restroom building. But it was real, solid, normal in a way the convoy hadn't been. I sat in the cab for maybe 10 minutes, waiting for my heart rate to slow down. The fog was starting to thin, revealing patches of star-filled sky. When I finally worked up the courage to walk around my truck, I checked every surface for damage from the frantic exit. That's when I found the business card tucked under my windshield wiper. It was old, yellowed with age, the text barely legible. Desert Transport Services. It read, established 1987. Below that, a phone number and an address in Austin, Nevada. I'd never seen the card before. Nobody had approached my truck while I was parked. The next morning, I stopped at a truck stop in Eureka and asked about Desert Transport Services. The old-timer behind the counter got a strange look on his face. "You sure about that name?" he asked. "Positive." Found their business card on my windshield. He disappeared into a back office and returned with a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1988. The headline read, "3 truckers missing on Highway 50. I read the article with growing dread. 3 drivers from Desert Transport Services had vanished during a February fog storm, somewhere between Austin and Eureka. Their trucks were found weeks later, abandoned in a wash 20 miles south of the highway. No signs of the drivers, no explanation for how the rigs had gotten so far off course. They say those boys are still out there," the old-timer told me quietly, "driving the fog, looking for company. Other drivers report seeing them sometimes. During heavy weather, I handed him back the clipping with numb fingers. What happened to the missing drivers? He shrugged. Nobody knows. Some folks think they got lost in the desert, died of exposure. Others say they joined the convoy permanent-like. I drove the rest of the way to Ely in bright sunlight, keeping my CB radio turned off. But every time I checked my mirrors, I half expected to see those red taillights following behind me. 3 months later, I was hauling a load of electronics from Vegas to Reno when I got caught in another fog bank on Highway 50. This time, I pulled over immediately, hazards flashing, and waited for it to clear. That's when I heard the CB chatter. "Breaker 1 to 9. This is Desert Transport looking for eastbound company on Highway 50. Any drivers out there want to join our convoy?" I switched off the radio and sat in my dark cab, watching the fog swirl around my windshield. In the distance, barely visible through the mist, I could see 3 sets of taillights moving slowly eastbound. They were still out there, still looking for drivers to join their endless journey through the Nevada desert. I waited 2 hours for the fog to clear completely before starting my engine again. Even then, I kept my radio off and drove straight through to Reno without stopping. The loneliest road in America isn't lonely by accident. Sometimes, the isolation is protection. Sometimes, the empty miles keep you safe from things that hunt in the darkness between destinations. So here's my warning to any driver who finds themselves on Highway 50 inches heavy fog. If you see taillights ahead and hear voices on the CB inviting you to join their convoy, keep driving. Don't respond. Don't follow. Because some convoys never reach their destination. They just keep rolling through the night, adding new drivers to their ranks, forever lost in the Nevada desert. If you've got your own convoy stories, your own encounters with trucks that shouldn't be there, share them below. Hit that like button if this sent chills down your spine. Subscribe for more tales from America's most haunted highways. The road remembers everything. And sometimes, it doesn't let go. If a trucker tells you never to stop on the lonesome stretches, there's a reason. I learned that lesson the hard way on Interstate 80, somewhere between Rawlins and Rock Springs, Wyoming. My name's Tommy Blake, and I've been hauling freight for 18 years. Started when I was 22, fresh out of the army, looking for work that kept me moving. The road became my home, my sanctuary, the place where I could think clearly. I specialized in overnight runs, the long hauls nobody else wanted. Less traffic, cooler temps, and the kind of solitude that let a man sort through his thoughts. That October night in 2023, I was hauling a load of automotive parts from Detroit to Salt Lake City. The weather had turned nasty around Cheyenne, forcing me to chain up and crawl through sleet for 3 hours. By the time I hit the high desert of southwest Wyoming, I was running 4 hours behind schedule and fighting to stay alert. The heater in my Peterbilt was working overtime, and the cab felt stuffy despite the bitter cold outside. It was just past 2:30 in the morning when I saw him. The figure stood maybe 30 yards off the shoulder, thumb extended toward the highway. Nothing unusual about that. Hitchhikers were common enough on these empty stretches, especially near the truck stops. But something felt wrong from the start. His posture was too rigid, too perfectly still. Most hitchhikers moved around, shifting their weight, checking over their shoulders. This one stood like a statue. My headlights swept over him as I approached. Male, probably in his 40s, wearing a heavy winter coat and knit cap. Nothing on his face suggested desperation or hope, just blank stillness. No backpack, no visible luggage, nothing to indicate he was actually traveling anywhere. I eased off the accelerator, muscle memory telling me to slow down and assess. The smart move would be to keep driving. Something about the scene felt staged, too convenient. But the temperature gauge on my dashboard read -18 degrees Fahrenheit. Nobody survives long in that kind of cold without shelter. Against my better judgment, I downshifted and pulled onto the shoulder about 50 yards ahead of him. The air brakes hissed as I brought the rig to a stop, hazard lights blinking into the darkness. Through my mirrors, I watched him approach with that same rigid, mechanical gait. No hurry, no relief, just steady forward motion. He tapped on the passenger door with his knuckles. 3 measured knocks, evenly spaced. I leaned across the cab and rolled the window down about 4 inches, keeping the door locked. "Need a ride?" I called out, studying his face in the dim light from my cab. Up close, his features looked wrong somehow, too symmetrical, like a mask. His skin had a waxy quality that reminded me of mannequins in department stores. But his eyes were the worst part. Completely black, no visible pupils or whites, just empty darkness that seemed to absorb light. "Salt Lake City," he said in a flat monotone. His breath didn't fog in the frigid air. My skin crawled. Everything about this felt wrong, but I'd already stopped. Backing out now might escalate whatever was happening here. "Climb up," I said, reaching over to unlock the door. He pulled the handle and swung up into the cab with fluid, unnatural grace. No grunt of effort, no pause to adjust to the height. He settled into the passenger seat and stared straight ahead through the windshield, hands folded neatly in his lap. "Buckle up," I said, shifting back into drive. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge the request, just sat there like a department store dummy. I pulled back onto the highway, accelerating slowly up to cruising speed. The heater was running full blast, but the temperature in the cab seemed to drop several degrees. My breath started fogging slightly, and I felt goosebumps rising on my arms. "Cold snap came in early this year," I said, trying to make conversation. No response. He continued staring straight ahead with those horrible black eyes. I glanced at the passenger seat every few seconds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. His coat looked expensive, real leather with clean stitching, but there were no road stains, no wear marks, nothing to suggest he'd been walking along the highway. His boots were spotless. "How long were you out there?" I asked. Silence. The miles crawled by. Every few minutes, I caught him turning his head slightly to look at me. Not his eyes, just his head, like a security camera tracking movement. When I looked directly at him, he'd snap back to staring forward. 20 minutes into the ride, the CB radio crackled to life. A burst of static. Then my own voice played back clearly through the speaker. "Need a ride?" My blood turned to ice water. I grabbed the mic with a shaking hand. "Who's on this channel?" More static. Then my voice again. "Climb up." I looked at my passenger. He was smiling now, a wide grin that split his face from ear to ear. Too wide. Human mouths don't stretch that far. Stop the truck, he said in that same flat monotone, like hell. I pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing the rig up to 75. The engine roared in protest, but I didn't care. I needed to get to Rock Springs, to lights and people and safety. Stop the truck, he repeated. The heater cut out suddenly. Within seconds, the temperature in the cab plummeted. My breath came out in thick clouds. Frost began forming on the inside of the windshield. Stop the truck. I could see my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The frost was spreading across the glass, obscuring my view of the road ahead. I flicked on the defroster, but nothing happened. The fan stayed silent. That's when I realized he wasn't breathing. No fog from his mouth. No rise and fall of his chest. He sat perfectly still, that impossible grin stretched across his face, staring at me with those black holes where eyes should be. I yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, pulling onto the shoulder. The rig shuddered and bucked as it hit the gravel, but I managed to bring it to a stop without rolling. My heart hammered against my ribs as I threw the truck into park. "Get out," I said, reaching across to unlock his door. "Get out right now." He turned his head toward me, that grin never wavering. "Thank you for the ride, Tommy Blake." I'd never told him my name. The door swung open, and he stepped down onto the gravel with the same fluid motion he'd used getting in. But instead of walking away, he moved around to my side of the truck. I heard his footsteps crunching on the frozen ground, circling the cab slowly. The driver's side window exploded inward. Glass showered across the seat as a pale hand reached through the opening. Fingers stretched toward my throat. I threw myself across the cab, scrambling for the passenger door. Behind me, something that might have been laughter echoed through the broken window. I tumbled out onto the shoulder, landing hard on my knees. The gravel bit through my jeans, but I barely felt it. I was too busy running. The road stretched empty in both directions, no headlights visible anywhere. I sprinted along the shoulder, boots slipping on loose stones, lungs burning in the frigid air. Behind me, I could hear metal groaning and tearing, like something was ripping my truck apart piece by piece. I ran for maybe half a mile before headlights appeared in the distance. A Wyoming highway patrol cruiser, moving fast with emergency lights flashing. I waved my arms frantically, and the trooper pulled over. "Sir, are you injured?" The officer was young, maybe late 20s, with concern written across his face. "My truck," I gasped, pointing back down the highway. Something attacked my truck. He helped me into the warm patrol car and radioed for backup before driving back to where I'd left the rig. We found it sitting peacefully on the shoulder, hazard lights still blinking. No broken windows, no damage. The engine was still running. "This your vehicle?" the trooper asked. I stared at the truck in disbelief. The driver's side window was intact, no glass on the seat, no signs of any disturbance. "I don't understand." The window was smashed. The trooper walked around the rig with his flashlight, checking every surface. "Looks fine to me. You been drinking tonight?" "Stone sober." I climbed back into the cab, running my hands over the window that should have been broken. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for one detail. The heater was working perfectly. "Altitude sickness, maybe," the trooper suggested. "Happens to drivers who aren't used to this elevation. Hallucinations, disorientation. You should probably call it a night." I nodded numbly. What else could I say? That I'd picked up something that wasn't human? That it had called me by name? The trooper followed me to the truck stop in Rock Springs, where I parked under the brightest lights I could find. I spent the rest of the night in the diner, drinking coffee and staring out at my rig, afraid to go back to the sleeper cab. At sunrise, I called my dispatcher and told him I was sick. Food poisoning. I needed a few days off. Then I drove straight home to Colorado, taking surface streets and staying off the interstate. 3 days later, I got a call from Wyoming Highway Patrol. The same trooper who'd found me on the road. "Mr. Blake, we found something you might want to know about. That night we met on I-80. Another trucker called in a hitchhiker about 10 miles west of where we found you. Same description, heavy coat, knit cap." My throat went dry. "Did they pick him up?" "That's the thing." Driver said he stopped, let the guy in, then blacked out. Woke up 3 hours later, parked at a rest area near the Utah border. No memory of how he got there. No sign of the passenger. I gripped the phone tighter. "What about security cameras at the rest area?" "That's what's strange. Cameras show his truck arriving at the rest area, but only one person gets out. Just the driver. No passenger." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing. I'd driven thousands of miles on I-80, picked up dozens of hitchhikers over the years. Most were harmless. Drifters, down on their luck travelers, folks whose cars had broken down, but that thing I'd encountered wasn't human. I was sure of it now. 2 weeks later, I was back on the road, hauling a load of electronics to Denver. I took I-76 through Nebraska, adding 200 miles to avoid I-80 through Wyoming. Call it superstition if you want. Call it common sense. But as I merged onto the interstate outside of Sterling, Colorado, I noticed something in my passenger side mirror that made my blood freeze. A figure standing by the on-ramp, thumb extended toward the highway. Heavy coat, knit cap. That same rigid, unnatural posture. I floored the accelerator and didn't look back. 6 months have passed since that night on I-80. I still drive the long hauls, still take the overnight runs nobody else wants. But I've changed my routes. I avoid Wyoming entirely now, even if it means burning extra fuel and losing money. Other drivers think I'm paranoid. Maybe they're right. But twice in the past month, I've heard chatter on the CB about strange hitchhikers on I-80, passengers who don't breathe, windows that shatter and then magically repair themselves, drivers who black out and wake up miles from where they remember being. The thing about the road is that it changes you. 18 years of hauling freight teaches you to trust your instincts, to recognize when something doesn't belong. That night, I picked up something that had no business being in my truck. Something that knew my name before I'd ever told it. So here's my advice to any driver reading this. If you see a hitchhiker on I-80 between Rawlins and Rock Springs, don't stop. Don't slow down. Keep your eyes on the road and your foot on the gas. And if you've got stories of your own, strange encounters that don't make sense, I'd like to hear them. Leave them in the comments below. Hit that like button if this resonated with you. Subscribe for more trucker stories that'll keep you awake at night. Because the road has secrets, and some of them are better left alone. There are voices on the CB that don't belong to living drivers. I know because I've been talking to them for 3 months, and I just figured out they've been dead for over a decade. I'm Ben Cooper. Been driving reefer freight between Texas and Colorado for 14 years. Temperature-controlled loads, mostly produce and pharmaceuticals. The kind of cargo that can't afford delays or equipment failures. It's steady work, good money, and the routes are familiar enough that I can drive them in my sleep. The CB radio was my lifeline on those long hauls. Channel 19 for traffic updates, weather reports, and the kind of casual conversation that keeps you sane during 16-hour drives. I'd made friends with dozens of drivers over the years. Voices I recognized, but faces I'd never seen. That's how it works on the road. You develop relationships with call signs and voices, people who exist only in the crackling static of radio waves. It started in January of 2024, somewhere between Amarillo and Denver on I-25. I was hauling a load of frozen vegetables, fighting through a snowstorm that had reduced visibility to maybe 50 yards. The weather service was calling for 8 inches, but it was coming down harder than predicted. That's when I first heard him. Breaker 1 to 9. This is Phantom Rider southbound on I-25 near Las Vegas, New Mexico. How's that weather looking up north? I keyed my mic, grateful for any company in the storm. Phantom Rider. This is Reefer Ben, about 40 miles north of your position. It's getting nasty up here. Snow's coming down sideways. Roads are slick as ice. Copy that, Reefer Ben. Appreciate the heads up. Stay safe out there. His voice was clear, professional, the kind of seasoned driver who'd seen everything the road could throw at him. Nothing unusual about the conversation, just two truckers sharing information about conditions ahead. But something nagged at me as I continued north. Las Vegas, New Mexico was on US 85, not I-25. A small detail, the kind of mistake anyone could make. But it stuck in my mind. Over the next few weeks, I heard from Phantom Rider several more times. Always professional, always helpful, sharing traffic updates and weather information. He seemed to run the same route I did. Texas to Colorado and back, usually a few hours behind or ahead of me. Reefer Ben, this is Phantom Rider. You might want to take the bypass around Santa Fe. Accident up ahead, emergency vehicles blocking 2 lanes. Phantom Rider, this is Reefer Ben. Thanks for the heads up. How'd you hear about it? Saw it on my way south. Big mess. Looked like it'll take hours to clear. I took his advice and saved myself 2 hours sitting in traffic. Phantom Rider's tips were always accurate, always helpful. He became a regular voice in my daily routine, someone I looked forward to hearing from, but he was never where he said he was. When he reported traffic from Albuquerque, I'd drive through the city and see no sign of the accidents or construction he described. When he warned me about weather in Colorado Springs, I'd arrive to find clear skies and dry roads. It was like he was driving a parallel route, similar to mine but slightly different, reporting conditions from places that matched my journey but not my reality. The second voice appeared in February. Breaker 1 to 9. This is Night Train running northbound out of Amarillo. Any drivers up ahead got information on fuel stops with reefer plugs? I was about 3 hours north of Amarillo, so I responded, Night Train, this is Reefer Ben. There's a decent truck stop in Dumas with reefer parking, clean facilities, good food. Much obliged, Reefer Ben. Been listening to you and Phantom Rider for a while now. Y'all seem like good people. That caught my attention. If Night Train had been monitoring our conversations, he would have heard us talking about routes and locations. So why was he asking about stops I'd already mentioned? Night Train, you've been running this route long, about 15 years now, he replied. Used to haul cattle before switching to dry goods. Roads changed a lot since I started. We fell into an easy conversation about the differences between livestock and freight hauling. Night Train was knowledgeable, experienced, the kind of driver who'd earned his expertise through years of hard miles. But like Phantom Rider, he was never quite where he claimed to be. The third voice showed up in March. Breaker 1 to 9. This is Iron Horse looking for northbound company through the Colorado mountains. Weather Service is calling for snow above 8,000 feet. I was approaching the climb to Denver when I heard him. The forecast was indeed calling for mountain snow, and company through the high passes was always welcome. Iron Horse, this is Reefer Ben, about 20 miles south of your position. What kind of rig are you running? Black Pete with a 48-foot trailer, hauling machinery parts to Colorado Springs. How about you? White Freightliner, reefer van. Got frozen food for Denver. Well, I'll keep an eye out for you. Maybe we can convoy through the pass, but when I reached the mountain grades, there was no Black Peterbilt in sight. I drove the entire route to Denver without seeing Iron Horse's truck, despite his promise to watch for me. By April, I was regularly talking to all 3 drivers. Phantom Rider, Night Train, and Iron Horse had become familiar voices, people I genuinely looked forward to hearing from. They shared traffic information, weather updates, truck stop recommendations, and general conversation about life on the road. The problem was that none of them were ever where they said they were. I started keeping a logbook of their transmissions, noting times, locations, and the information they provided. The pattern was disturbing. They always seemed to be running routes parallel to mine, reporting conditions that were similar but not identical to what I encountered. It was like they were driving ghost highways, invisible roads that followed the same general path as the interstates but existed in some other dimension. The breakthrough came in late April, during a conversation with Iron Horse about truck stops along I-25. "You ever stop at the TA in Santa Fe?" he asked. "All the time," I replied. "Good fuel prices, decent food. I used to love that place. Had the best green chili cheeseburgers in New Mexico. Shame it burned down." I nearly dropped the mic. "Iron Horse, the TA in Santa Fe didn't burn down. I was just there yesterday." Static for a long moment, then, "Must be thinking of a different place. My mistake." But he wasn't wrong about the green chili cheeseburgers. The TA in Santa Fe was famous for them. Every driver who ran the I-25 corridor knew about that restaurant. That night, I started researching. If Iron Horse remembered the TA burning down, maybe there was a record of it somewhere. Local newspapers, insurance reports, something that would explain his confusion. What I found made my blood run cold. The TA in Santa Fe had burned down. In 2008, a kitchen fire that spread to the main building, destroying the restaurant and most of the travel center. It was rebuilt 2 years later, bigger and better than before. But if Iron Horse remembered it burning down, that meant he'd been driving this route for at least 15 years, just like he'd claimed. And if he hadn't seen the new building, I pulled up news archives, searching for truck accidents along I-25 inches New Mexico. It took hours, but eventually I found what I was looking for. March 15th, 2009. 3-truck accident during a blizzard near Las Vegas, New Mexico. All 3 drivers killed instantly when their rigs jackknifed on black ice and collided head-on with an oncoming semi. The victims were identified as Robert Phantom Williams, driving a black Kenworth, James Night Train Morrison, hauling dry goods in a blue Freightliner, and Michael Iron Horse Rodriguez, transporting machinery parts in a black Peterbilt. They'd been dead for 15 years. I stared at the newspaper article for a long time, trying to process what I was reading. The 3 drivers I'd been talking to for months, the voices that had become part of my daily routine, were ghosts, but they felt so real. Their advice was accurate, their personalities distinct and consistent. They remembered details about truck stops and routes, shared stories about their families and their years on the road. How could dead men provide useful traffic information? How could ghosts warn me about accidents and weather conditions? I needed to test my theory. The next morning, I was southbound toward Texas when I heard Phantom Rider's voice. "Breaker 1 to 9. This is Phantom Rider northbound near Raton Pass. Road construction ahead down to 1 lane. Expect delays." I keyed my mic, hands shaking slightly. "Phantom Rider, this is Reefer Ben. Can you tell me what year it is?" Static for a moment, then, "It's 2009, of course. March 15th. "Why do you ask?" "March 15th, 2009. The exact date of their fatal accident. Phantom Rider." "Robert, do you remember what happened that day?" Another pause, longer this time. When his voice came back, it was different. Confused. Uncertain. There was snow. Black ice. We were running together. The 3 of us. Night Train and Iron Horse were right behind me. The roads were so slick. "Robert, that was 15 years ago. It's 2024 now. No." His voice crackled through the static, becoming fainter. "No, that's not right. I'm driving north to Denver. Got a load of electronics. Should be there by tomorrow, but his signal was fading, breaking up into fragments. Can't be. Not possible. We were just. Then silence. I tried calling for Night Train and Iron Horse, but got no response. The CB channels were empty except for the usual chatter from living drivers. They were gone. For 3 days, I drove my route in silence. No familiar voices offering advice or company, just the normal traffic of working truckers, people hauling freight in the present day, dealing with current weather and road conditions. I started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. 15 years of solitary driving can play tricks on your mind. Maybe I'd created these phantom companions to cope with the isolation of the road. But then, on Thursday evening near Trinidad, Colorado, I heard a new voice. Breaker 1 to 9. This is Diesel Dan looking for northbound company through the mountains. Getting lonely out here. I keyed my mic cautiously. Diesel Dan, this is Reefer Ben, about 10 miles ahead of your position. What kind of rig are you running? Red Mac with a cattle trailer. Empty, heading back to Colorado Springs. Been driving this route for about 20 years now. We talked for an hour about trucking, road conditions, and life in general. Diesel Dan was friendly, experienced, and helpful. He warned me about construction near Pueblo and recommended a good truck stop in Colorado Springs. Everything seemed normal until he mentioned something that made my skin crawl. You ever talk to those other drivers on this route? Phantom Rider, Night Train, Iron Horse? Good folks, always helpful. My mouth went dry. Diesel Dan, when's the last time you talked to them? Oh, just last week. They were warning me about that accident near Las Vegas. Bad one, multiple trucks involved. Those boys probably saved my life with their heads up. I pulled over at the next rest area, hands shaking too badly to drive safely. If Diesel Dan was talking to the ghost drivers, and if they'd warned him about the accident that killed them, I grabbed my laptop and started searching news archives for truck accidents in Colorado. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. May 3rd, 2012. Single vehicle accident near Trinidad, Colorado. Daniel, Diesel Dan Martinez, 47, killed when his cattle truck overturned during a thunderstorm. Vehicle left the roadway at high speed, rolled multiple times down an embankment. Diesel Dan had been dead for 12 years. That's when I understood. The CB radio wasn't just picking up voices from the past. It was connecting me to drivers who had died on these routes. Spirits trapped in an endless loop of their final journeys. They didn't know they were dead. In their reality, they were still making their last runs, still trying to reach destinations they would never see. Time meant nothing to them. They existed in a perpetual present, forever driving roads that led nowhere. And somehow, I'd become part of their network. Over the next few months, I encountered more ghost voices. Drivers from different eras, all killed in accidents along my regular routes. Some had been dead for decades, others for just a few years. They all shared the same confusion about time, the same certainty that they were still alive and working. There was Mary Highway Angel Patterson, who died in 1998 when her truck was hit by a drunk driver outside Albuquerque. She still warned other drivers about hazardous conditions, still offered assistance to anyone who needed help. Bobby Roadkill Thompson, killed in 2015 when his rig caught fire near Las Cruces. He continued to report mechanical problems and safety hazards, trying to prevent other drivers from experiencing his fate. Sarah Mile High Johnson, who died in 2020 when her truck went off the road during a blizzard in the Colorado mountains. She still provided weather updates for the high passes, still helped drivers navigate through dangerous conditions. Dozens of voices, all trapped in the moment of their final journeys. I tried to help them understand what had happened, to explain that they were dead and needed to move on, but they couldn't accept it. The truth would break up their transmissions, send them back into silence for days or weeks. They were caught in a loop of purpose, forever trying to complete their last runs, forever warning other drivers about dangers they'd encountered. In death, they'd become guardian angels of the highway, protecting the living from the hazards that had claimed their own lives. But there was something else I discovered, something that made the whole situation even more disturbing. The ghost drivers could predict accidents, not just report conditions they'd encountered, but warn about accidents that hadn't happened yet. Phantom Rider would tell me to avoid a certain stretch of highway, and later I'd hear about a fatal crash in that exact location. Night Train would recommend an alternate route, and I'd learn that the original path had been blocked by jackknifed trucks or weather-related accidents. They were seeing echoes of future disasters, patterns of danger that repeated along the same routes where they died. The highways themselves seemed to generate these catastrophes, following some kind of cosmic schedule that only the dead could perceive. By summer, I was relying on their warnings to stay safe. The ghost drivers had become my supernatural traffic service, guiding me around accidents before they happened, steering me away from dangerous weather, protecting me from the same fate that had claimed them. But the price of their protection was becoming part of their world. I started losing time on the road, arriving at destinations with no memory of how I'd gotten there. Hours would pass in what felt like minutes. Sometimes I'd find myself stopped at truck stops I didn't remember visiting, with fuel in my tanks that I didn't remember buying. The boundary between the living world and the ghost highway was blurring. Other drivers started avoiding me. At truck stops, I'd try to strike up conversations, only to have people walk away mid-sentence. It was like they could sense something wrong with me, some contamination from my contact with the dead. I began to understand that the ghost drivers weren't just trapped souls. They were recruiters, whether they realized it or not. The highway was building a network of spectral truckers, dead drivers who continued to work their routes for eternity, and I was being inducted into their ranks while still alive. The final warning came in September, during a conversation with Phantom Rider about road construction near Santa Fe. "Reefer Ben," his voice crackled through the static. "You need to be careful out there. I've been watching your route, and there's danger ahead." "What kind of danger, Phantom?" "The kind that brings drivers over to our side. The highway wants you, Ben. It's been calling you for months. Every time you listen to our warnings, every time you trust our guidance, you get a little more connected to this place." I felt ice in my veins. "What do you mean?" "Look at your clock, Ben. What time is it?" I glanced at the dashboard. The digital display read 3:47 a.m., but that was impossible. It had been 3:47 when I'd started driving 6 hours ago. "Time doesn't work right when you're between worlds," Phantom continued. "And you've been between worlds for months now. Pretty soon, you won't be able to find your way back to the living side." "How do I stop it?" "You can't talk to us anymore, Ben. No matter what happens, no matter what warnings we try to give you, you have to stop listening. Turn off your CB radio and keep it off. Break the connection before it's too late." His signal was already fading. "Remember us, Ben. Tell people what you learned, but don't try to save us. We're already gone." The radio went silent. I drove in absolute quiet for the rest of that trip. The CB powered down and unplugged. It was the loneliest drive of my life, but gradually I felt time starting to behave normally again. Miles passed at their proper rate. Truck stops appeared where my GPS said they would be. I was returning to the world of the living. When I got home to Dallas, I quit long-haul trucking, sold my rig, found work doing local deliveries, short runs that kept me close to populated areas, away from the lonely highways where ghost drivers patrol the night. But I kept the CB radio. Sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, I turn it on and listen. The ghost drivers are still out there, still protecting living truckers from the dangers they couldn't avoid themselves. Phantom Rider, Night Train, Iron Horse, and dozens of others, forever making their final runs. They saved my life countless times. The least I can do is remember their names, If you're a driver reading this, and you hear voices on the CB giving advice that seems too good to be true, be careful. Help from the dead comes with a price. The more you rely on their guidance, the closer you get to joining their eternal convoy. But if you must listen, if the warnings are keeping you safe, remember to honor the drivers giving them. They died trying to do their jobs, and in death, they're still trying to protect their fellow truckers. Share their stories in the comments below. Hit that like button if you've ever heard unexplained voices on your CB. Subscribe for more tales from the highway that exists somewhere between the living world and the afterlife, because the road never forgets its casualties. And sometimes, the dead keep working long after their final paycheck. There's a truck stop on Interstate 70 Inches, Kansas that only appears between midnight and sunrise. I know because I've been there 3 times, and I'm starting to understand that each visit costs more than just diesel fuel. Name's Alex Morrison. Been hauling livestock feed from Nebraska to Kansas for 11 years. It's honest work. Grain elevators, feed lots, dairy operations scattered across the wheat belt. The routes are predictable, the customers reliable, and the pay steady enough to keep my Kenworth rolling and my family fed. Most of my runs were day trips, but occasionally I'd get a rush order that required overnight driving. That's how I first encountered Murphy's Last Stop, a truck plaza that shouldn't exist according to every map and GPS system I've ever used. It was October of 2023, and I was hauling 38,000 pounds of corn to a feedlot outside of Salina. Left Nebraska around 11 p.m., planning to make the delivery by sunrise and be back home for breakfast. The weather was perfect, clear skies, no wind. The kind of night that makes you appreciate the solitude of the highway. I'd been driving for about 2 hours when my fuel gauge started acting up. The needle was jumping erratically between half full and quarter tank, then suddenly dropped to empty with the low fuel warning light flashing red. That didn't make sense. I'd filled up completely before leaving Nebraska, and my rig got decent mileage on flat highway, even accounting for the weight of my load. I should have had enough fuel to reach Salina with plenty to spare, but the gauge was insistent, and the engine was starting to feel sluggish. Better safe than stranded, especially on a lonely stretch of I-70 inches the middle of nowhere. That's when I saw the signs. First came a weathered billboard advertising Murphy's Last Stop, food, fuel, friendly service. The lettering was faded, like it had been baking in the sun for decades, but it was readable enough. 5 miles later, another sign. Murphy's Last Stop. Next exit. 24-hour service. I couldn't remember ever seeing these signs before, despite driving this route dozens of times. But Kansas had plenty of small truck stops that came and went with changing ownership and economic conditions. Maybe Murphy's was a recent addition to the highway. The exit appeared exactly where the sign promised. A standard off-ramp with a blue service sign indicating fuel and food available. I downshifted and took the exit. Following the access road about a quarter mile to a brightly lit truck plaza, Murphy's Last Stop looked like every other highway fuel station built in the 1980s. Single-story building with large windows, maybe 8 fuel islands with diesel pumps, parking for 30 or 40 trucks. Nothing fancy, but clean and well-maintained. What struck me as odd was how busy it was. At nearly 2 a.m., on a Tuesday night, the lot was almost full of trucks. Drivers were walking to and from the building, some fueling up, others just stretching their legs. The scene looked normal enough, but something felt off about the energy of the place. I pulled up to an empty pump island and climbed down from my cab. The night air was warm for October, almost balmy, with a hint of something sweet that reminded me of carnival cotton candy. The diesel pump looked standard. Card reader, display screen, the usual array of fuel grades. I swiped my credit card and selected the cheapest option, not wanting to spend more than necessary on an unexpected fuel stop. But when I lifted the nozzle and inserted it into my tank, Nothing happened. No click of the pump engaging, no display of gallons or price. Just silence. First time here? I turned to find a middle-aged man in clean coveralls walking toward me. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent years working around trucks, with grease-stained hands and the easy confidence of an experienced mechanic. "Yeah," I said, having some trouble with the pump. He smiled, showing teeth that were too white and too perfect. "Happens sometimes. Let me give you a hand." He did something to the pump mechanism that I couldn't quite see, and suddenly fuel began flowing into my tank. The display showed gallons accumulating, but no price. The cost counter remained at 0, no matter how much diesel I pumped. "On the house," he said when I looked confused. "First visit is always free. Murphy's policy. I should have been grateful. Free fuel was a trucker's dream, especially on an unexpected stop. But something about the man's smile made me uncomfortable. "How much fuel you need?" he asked. "Just enough to get to Selena. Maybe 50 gallons. Better fill her up," he suggested. "Never know when you might need it." Against my better judgment, I kept pumping until my tanks were completely full. 185 gallons of diesel fuel, all at no charge. The man watched me the entire time, that same unsettling smile never leaving his face. "You should come inside," he said as I hung up the nozzle. Murphy likes to meet new customers personally. The building's interior was larger than it appeared from outside, with aisles of trucking supplies, snacks, and hot food under warming lights. But the real surprise was the number of people inside. Dozens of drivers milling around, talking in small groups, drinking coffee at scattered tables, and they were all looking at me, not staring exactly, but definitely aware of my presence. Every conversation seemed to pause as I walked past. Every face turned in my direction with expressions of mild curiosity, mixed with something I couldn't identify. "You must be Alex Morrison." The voice came from behind the counter, where an elderly man in a clean white shirt was arranging cigarette displays. He looked up at me with eyes that seemed much older than his face. "That's right. How did you? We know all our customers," he said, extending a hand across the counter. "I'm Murphy. Welcome to my place." His handshake was firm but oddly cold, like he'd been handling ice. Up close, his skin had a waxy quality that reminded me of funeral home cosmetics. "Heard you got some free fuel," Murphy continued. "First visit special. Hope you'll consider stopping by again when you're in the area." "Sure thing. Thanks for the hospitality." I grabbed a coffee and a bag of peanuts, partly out of politeness and partly because I needed caffeine for the rest of the drive. Murphy waved away my money when I tried to pay. "No charge for regulars," he said. "You're family now." As I walked back to my truck, I noticed something strange about the other vehicles in the lot. They were all older models. Trucks from the 1970s and 80s, many with faded paint and chrome that had seen better days. Not unusual necessarily, but odd to see so many vintage rigs in one place. I climbed back into my cab and fired up the engine, grateful to be moving again. The fuel gauge showed completely full, confirming that the mysterious pump had worked exactly as advertised. The drive to Selena was uneventful. I made my delivery at sunrise, got the paperwork signed, and headed home to Nebraska. But I couldn't stop thinking about Murphy's last stop, the free fuel, and the crowd of drivers who'd seemed so interested in my presence. 2 weeks later, I was running another overnight load when my fuel gauge started acting up again. Same erratic behavior, same sudden drop to empty despite having plenty of fuel when I'd left Nebraska, and once again, Murphy's last stop appeared on my route. This time I was more observant, paying attention to details I'd missed during my first visit. The billboard advertising Murphy's was in the exact same condition as before. Same faded lettering, same weathered appearance. It should have shown more deterioration after 2 weeks of Kansas weather, but it looked identical. The truck stop itself was also unchanged. Same busy lot full of vintage trucks. Same warm night air with that hint of cotton candy sweetness. Same crowd of drivers inside the building. Murphy greeted me like an old friend, offering free fuel and snacks with that same unsettling smile. But this time I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The other customers in the store were wearing the exact same clothes as before. Not similar clothes. The exact same outfits. A driver in a red flannel shirt and John Deere cap was standing in the same spot, holding the same cup of coffee. A woman in a blue denim jacket was reading the same magazine at the same table. It was like walking into a photograph that had been taken 2 weeks earlier. I fueled up quickly and left without spending much time inside. The drive to my destination was normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with Murphy's last stop. A month passed before I encountered the truck stop again. Same fuel gauge malfunction. Same mysterious exit appearing on I-70. Same scene of busy nighttime activity. But this time, I came prepared. I'd brought a camera and a notebook, determined to document what I was seeing. As soon as I pulled into Murphy's lot, I started taking pictures of license plates, truck models, and the people moving around the facility. Murphy seemed pleased to see me again. "Alex, welcome back. How's the trucking business treating you?" "Can't complain. Free fuel doesn't hurt." He laughed. "Nothing's really free, son. But we'll talk about payment later." That phrase sent a chill down my spine, but I tried to play it casual. "What kind of payment?" "Oh, just a little favor when the time comes. Nothing too demanding." I finished fueling and drove away without learning more about Murphy's idea of payment. But when I developed the pictures from that night, I discovered something that confirmed my worst suspicions. The photos were all blank, not overexposed or underexposed. Completely blank, as if I'd been taking pictures of empty air. Every shot of the truck stop, the building, the other customers. Nothing but white space, where images should have been. I tried taking pictures with different cameras on subsequent visits. Digital, film, disposable cameras from drugstores. The results were always the same. Murphy's last stop couldn't be photographed. Over the next 6 months, I visited the truck stop 5 more times. Always under the same circumstances. Fuel gauge malfunction, mysterious exit appearing, free diesel and snacks from Murphy and his crew. I started recognizing some of the regular customers. There was Harold, an older driver who claimed to haul furniture from North Carolina to California. Janet, a woman who ran refrigerated loads between Florida and Minnesota. Bobby, a young guy who transported construction equipment around the Midwest. They were all friendly, eager to share stories about their roots and experiences, but their stories never changed. Harold always told the same anecdote about delivering a piano to Las Vegas. Janet always complained about the same dispatcher who overloaded her trailer. Bobby always bragged about the same perfectly executed backing maneuver in Chicago. It was like they were stuck in conversational loops, repeating the same interactions over and over. I began to suspect that Murphy's last stop existed outside normal time somehow. The customers weren't real people. They were echoes, recordings of drivers who had visited the place and somehow become trapped there. But what did that mean for me? The answer came during my 7th visit, in March of 2024. I was talking to Murphy about fuel prices when he made an observation that froze my blood. "You've been coming here for 6 months now, Alex. That's enough visits to qualify for our frequent customer program." "What kind of program?" His smile was wider than before, showing more teeth than seemed to fit in his mouth. "Permanent parking. No more worries about fuel, food, or finding loads. Just stay here with us, and we'll take care of everything." I looked around the store with new understanding. The other customers weren't just trapped. They were being offered the same deal. Eternal truck stop residence in exchange for giving up their lives on the road. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I've got deliveries to make." "Oh, those can wait," Murphy said. "Time works differently here. You could stay for years and still make your morning delivery in Salina." He was right about time working differently. I'd noticed that my visits to Murphy's seemed to last hours but only showed up as minutes on my logbook. The truck stop existed in some kind of temporal bubble where normal schedules didn't apply. "Let me think about it," I said, backing toward the door. Murphy's expression darkened. "You've had enough free fuel to think, son. Time to pay up." The other customers were moving now, closing in around me with mechanical precision. Their faces were blank, expressionless, like mannequins that had learned to walk. I made a run for the exit, pushing past Harold and Janet and Bobby, all of whom grabbed at me with hands that felt cold and plastic. Behind me, Murphy was shouting something about ungrateful customers and outstanding debts. I reached my truck and fired up the engine, not bothering with a proper pre-trip inspection. The parking lot around me was changing, the other trucks fading away like mirages. Murphy's building was growing darker, its windows becoming empty holes in a facade that was losing structural integrity. I floored the accelerator and peeled out of the lot, tires smoking as I raced back toward the highway. In my mirrors, I could see Murphy standing in the parking lot, no longer bothering to maintain his human appearance. His true form was something tall and angular, with too many joints and shadows where his face should be. The access road back to I-70 was collapsing as I drove, pavement crumbling into darkness on both sides of my truck. I kept the pedal down, racing against the dissolution of Murphy's pocket dimension. I made it back to the interstate just as the exit ramp disappeared behind me. When I checked my mirrors, there was nothing but empty prairie where Murphy's last stop had been. My fuel gauge was reading empty again. I made it to the next real truck stop running on fumes and determination. When I filled up my tanks, I discovered that they were bone dry. Every gallon of Murphy's free fuel had vanished along with his establishment. That was 8 months ago. Since then, I've only driven daytime routes, avoiding the lonely stretches of highway where Murphy's might appear. I've had my fuel system checked by 3 different mechanics, all of whom insist there's nothing wrong with my gauge. But last week, I had to take an emergency run to Colorado. A regular customer's shipment had been delayed, and they needed feed delivered by sunrise. The only way to make the schedule was to drive through the night. At 1:47 a.m., my fuel gauge started jumping erratically. I'm writing this at a real truck stop outside of Denver, trying to decide what to do. My delivery is still 4 hours away, and my gauge is showing empty despite having 3/4 of a tank when I left Nebraska. Murphy's signs are starting to appear along the highway. I know I should keep driving, risk running out of fuel rather than visit that place again. But my customer is counting on me, and my family needs the money from this run. Maybe I can get in and out quickly, take just enough fuel to finish the delivery and get home. Avoid Murphy himself. Don't talk to the other customers. Don't linger in that timeless bubble where reality breaks down. Or maybe I'm just telling myself what I want to hear, because the truth is, part of me is curious about Murphy's offer. No more worries about fuel, food, or finding loads. No more stress about delivery schedules or customer complaints. Just eternal parking at a truck stop where time stands still and everyone knows your name. It's tempting, especially after 11 years of fighting traffic and weather and mechanical problems. The road wears you down eventually, makes you wonder if there's an easier way. But I think about my wife and kids waiting at home. I think about the real customers who depend on drivers like me to keep their operations running. I think about the difference between the living world and Murphy's static paradise where nothing ever changes. If you're reading this, and you drive the lonely highways at night, watch out for signs advertising Murphy's last stop. The fuel is free, but the cost might be everything you have to live for. And if you see my truck parked in that lot, windows dark and empty, I don't stop to check on me. Just keep driving and remember that some deals are too good to be true. The highway is calling. Time to make a choice. If this story resonates with you, If you've seen truck stops that don't appear on any map, share your experiences below. Hit that like button if midnight fuel stops give you the chills. Subscribe for more tales from the road where reality gets thin and the price of convenience might be higher than you think. Because every mile of highway has its shadows. And sometimes, those shadows offer exactly what you think you need. There's something wrong with the Barstow way station after midnight. Every trucker who runs the I-15 corridor knows it, but nobody talks about it openly. We just drive past when the lights are on, and the scales are supposed to be closed. Name's Tyler Reeves. Been pulling flatbeds out of Phoenix for 8 years now. Steel, lumber, heavy machinery. If it needs tie-downs and tarps, I'm your guy. The work keeps me moving between Arizona, Nevada, and California, burning up I-15 like it's my personal racetrack. Most of the time, anyway. That March night in 2024 changed everything. I was hauling a load of structural steel beams from Phoenix to a construction site in Riverside. Left around 10 p.m., planning to make the delivery by sunrise and beat the California traffic. The desert was clear and cold, stars sharp as broken glass in the black sky above. Perfect driving weather. The load was legal. Barely. 47,000 pounds of steel on a flatbed, right at the edge of what I could haul without permits. I'd run this route dozens of times, knew every way station and inspection point between Phoenix and the Pacific. Most were closed after business hours, just empty buildings with dark windows and locked gates. But the Barstow station has always been different. I'd driven past it maybe 50 times over the years, usually during daylight hours when it was operating normally. Standard setup, concrete pad with embedded scales, small building for the inspectors, signs directing commercial vehicles to stop when lights were flashing. Nothing unusual about it during the day. At night, though, things got strange. I'd heard stories from other drivers, scales that weighed trucks differently after midnight, inspectors who asked questions that didn't make sense, paperwork that disappeared from your logbook after you left. Most guys just shrugged it off as highway legend. The kind of stories that grow in the telling. I should have listened to those stories. It was just past midnight when I crested the hill approaching Barstow. The way station came into view maybe 2 miles ahead, and my heart sank. The overhead lights were flashing, the electronic sign reading, "All commercial vehicles must stop," when light on. I checked my Qualcomm unit. No notifications. No alerts about special inspections or enforcement operations. Just standard way station operation in the middle of the night, which made no sense. California DOT didn't run graveyard shifts at rural stations, but the lights were on, and ignoring a way station was a good way to lose your CDL. I downshifted and guided my rig onto the approach ramp, air brakes sighing as I rolled to a stop on the scales. The building ahead was brightly lit, every window glowing yellow against the desert darkness. I could see figures moving around inside, but something about their movements seemed wrong. Too quick, too jerky, like footage played at the wrong speed. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, engine idling, waiting for the green light to tell me I could proceed. Instead, a red light flashed, and an electronic voice crackled through the speaker. "Driver, report to office for inspection." My stomach tightened. Random inspections weren't unusual, but they typically happened during business hours when proper staff was available. I grabbed my logbook and paperwork, climbed down from the cab, and walked toward the building. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It hit me as soon as I opened the office door. Sweet and chemical, like industrial cleaner mixed with something organic that had been left in the sun too long. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed louder than they should have, casting harsh shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. "Driver?" A woman's voice called from behind a partition. "Come on back." I walked through the narrow hallway, past empty offices with dark windows. The building felt much larger inside than it appeared from outside, with corridors stretching off in directions that didn't match the exterior layout. The inspector was waiting in a small room at the back. Middle-aged woman in a DOT uniform, name tag reading Patricia Wells. She looked normal enough, but her movements were slightly off, too precise, like she was consciously thinking about each gesture. "Have a seat," she said, gesturing to a metal chair across from her desk. "Routine inspection. Just need to check your paperwork." I handed over my logbook, bill of lading, and registration. She flipped through the pages slowly, too slowly, like she was reading every word. Her eyes didn't move in the right pattern for someone actually reading. "Steel beams," she said without looking up. "Phoenix to Riverside. That's right. Heavy load." Her fingers drummed against the desk in a rhythm that didn't quite match human timing. "Let's take a look at your rig." We walked back outside, where my truck sat under the harsh glare of the way station lights. The steel beams were properly secured, chains tight, tarps neat and centered. I tied down thousands of loads over the years, knew exactly what inspectors looked for, but Patricia Wells wasn't looking at my tie-downs. She was staring at the steel beams themselves, running her hand along their length like she was feeling for something specific. Her fingers traced patterns in the metal, and I could swear the beams were humming softly under her touch. "Interesting," she murmured. "Very interesting. Ma'am?" She looked up at me with eyes that reflected the overhead lights like an animal's. "This steel. Where exactly did it come from?" I checked my paperwork. "Southwest Metal Works in Phoenix. Standard I-beam construction steel." "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "I mean, where did it really come from? Before the mill. Before it was melted and formed." The question made no sense. Steel was steel. Recycled scrap. Ore from mines. Industrial waste. Nobody tracked the genealogy of construction materials. "I don't know what you mean," I said. Her smile stretched too wide. "Some metal remembers, driver. Holds on to things from before. This steel, it remembers." A chill ran down my spine. I dealt with eccentric inspectors before. Guys who took their job too seriously or had theories about trucking regulations. But this felt different. Wrong. "Look, I've got a delivery to make," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is my load legal or not?" "Oh, it's legal," she said, still running her hands over the steel beams. "Perfectly legal. But there's something else we need to discuss." She led me back into the office, but this time we went deeper into the building, through corridors I hadn't seen before. The walls were lined with photographs, black and white images of trucks, drivers, cargo, all from different eras, spanning decades. "Our records," Patricia explained, noticing my stare. "Every vehicle that's passed through this station, every load we've inspected." I stopped in front of one photograph. A flatbed truck from the 1970s, loaded with steel beams identical to mine. The driver stood beside his rig, smiling at the camera, but his face was wrong somehow. Blurred, like the photo had been damaged. "That's Jimmy Martinez," Patricia said. "Came through here in 1976, hauling steel from Phoenix to Los Angeles. Same route you're running. What happened to him?" Her smile returned. "He stayed. Joined our records. Became part of the station's history." I backed away from the wall of photographs, heart pounding. "I need to go. My delivery. Will wait," she finished. "It always waits. Time moves differently here after midnight." The building seemed to shift around us, walls expanding and contracting like breathing. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder, and that sweet chemical smell grew stronger. "You see, driver, this station serves a special purpose. We don't just weigh trucks and check paperwork. We collect things. Preserve them. Make sure they don't get lost. I was backing toward what I hoped was the exit, but the hallways had rearranged themselves. Every door I tried opened onto empty rooms or dead-end corridors. Your steel. Patricia continued, following me at that same measured pace. It came from a building in Detroit, demolished in 2012. Before that, it was part of a factory where they made airplane parts during World War II. Before that, her voice was changing, becoming hollow and echoing. The uniform she wore started to look faded, like it hadn't been cleaned in decades. Before that, it was part of something else, something that shouldn't have been melted down and reformed. Some materials hold memories, driver, and some memories don't want to stay buried. I found a door that led outside, but it wasn't the entrance I'd come through. I was on the wrong side of the building, facing the desert instead of the highway. My truck was nowhere in sight. Behind me, Patricia's voice drifted through the night air. You can't leave without your load, Tyler Reeves, and your load doesn't want to leave. I ran around the building, searching for my rig. The way station seemed larger than before, stretching out into the darkness with additional buildings and structures that hadn't been there when I arrived. Finally, I found the scales. My truck was still there, but something was different. The steel beams on my trailer were glowing softly in the darkness, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. The chains holding them down were smoking, metal links glowing red hot. I climbed into the cab and fired up the engine, not caring about proper procedure or inspection protocols. The truck lurched forward, and I felt the trailer's weight shift behind me. In my mirrors, I could see the way station building shrinking behind us, but it looked wrong, too tall, with too many windows, like a structure from a fever dream. The steel beams continued to glow, casting an eerie red light across the trailer deck. The chains were definitely smoking now, and I could smell hot metal even inside the cab, but the load was secure, and I wasn't stopping again until I reached Riverside. I merged back onto I-15, pushing the rig up to 70 miles per hour. The desert flew past in a blur of darkness and distant lights. Every few minutes, I checked the mirrors, expecting to see Patricia Wells or someone else from the way station following me. Instead, I saw something worse. The steel beams were moving. Not dramatically, just small shifts and adjustments, like they were settling into a more comfortable position. But steel beams don't move on their own, especially when they're chained down tight. I'd hauled enough loads to know when cargo was shifting, and this was different. This looked deliberate. I grabbed the CB mic, desperate to talk to another driver, anyone who might explain what was happening. Breaker 1 to 9. This is Flatbed Tyler westbound on I-15 near Barstow. Anyone else out there see anything strange at the scales tonight? Static answered me. Empty, hissing static that went on longer than it should have. Then a voice came through, faint and distorted. Tyler Reeves. Tyler Reeves. It was Patricia Wells. Somehow, she was transmitting on my CB frequency from back at the way station. But we were 15 miles away now, well beyond normal radio range. You can't outrun the steel driver. It knows where it needs to go. I switched off the radio and focused on driving. Whatever was happening, I'd deal with it when I reached the delivery site. Someone there would have answers, or at least a forklift to get this cursed load off my trailer. But the beams kept moving. By the time I reached Victorville, they'd shifted enough to put slack in some of the chains. I could hear the metal groaning and creaking behind me, like the beams were trying to arrange themselves into some kind of pattern. I pulled into a truck stop, parked under the brightest lights I could find, and walked back to inspect the load. What I saw made my blood run cold. The steel beams hadn't just shifted, they'd rotated. What had been a neat, parallel stack was now arranged in an intricate pattern, beams crossing and interlocking like some kind of geometric puzzle. The chains that should have been holding them down were draped loosely around the load, completely ineffective, but the beams weren't falling off the trailer. They were holding themselves in place. I walked around the entire rig, checking every angle. The pattern the beams had formed looked familiar, but I couldn't place where I'd seen it before. It reminded me of architectural drawings, blueprints for some kind of structure. Then I remembered the photographs in Patricia Wells's office, the old pictures of trucks and drivers from decades past. In several of them, I'd seen steel loads arranged in this same configuration. My hands were shaking as I climbed back into the cab. I needed to get this load delivered and get as far away from it as possible. Whatever those beams were trying to become, I didn't want to be around when they finished. The rest of the drive to Riverside passed in a blur of anxiety and weird CB chatter. Every few miles, Patricia Wells's voice would break through the static, always saying the same thing. The steel remembers, Tyler. It remembers what it used to be. I reached the construction site just as the sun was coming up, golden light streaming across the empty lot where my delivery was supposed to go. A foreman was waiting for me, coffee cup in hand, looking annoyed at my late arrival. "You're 3 hours behind schedule," he said as I backed up to the unloading area. "Had some issues with the load," I muttered, climbing down from the cab. Steel kept shifting on me. He walked around to look at the trailer and stopped dead. What the hell happened back here? The beams had rearranged themselves again during the final stretch of driving. Now they formed something that looked almost like a building frame. Vertical supports, horizontal crossbeams, angled braces. It was incomplete, but the basic structure was clear. "This isn't how we ordered it," the foreman said, pulling out his paperwork. "We need random length construction beams, not whatever this is." "Look, I just deliver the steel," I said. "You'll have to take it up with Southwest Metal Works." But as the foreman called over his crew to start unloading, something strange happened. The moment the first worker touched one of the beams, it went rigid. Not just heavy, rigid. Like it was welded in place. 3 men couldn't budge it. "Get the crane," the foreman ordered. But when the crane operator tried to lift the first beam, the cable snapped. Not frayed or stretched, snapped clean through, like it had been cut with bolt cutters. That's when I heard the humming. It was soft at first, barely audible over the construction site noise, but it was definitely coming from the steel beams. A low, harmonic vibration that seemed to resonate in my chest. "I'm out of here," I told the foreman, unhooking my trailer connections. "This is your problem now." But as I walked back toward my tractor, one of the construction workers grabbed my arm. "You can't just leave this here, man. This steel, it's doing something." Oh, I looked back at the trailer. The beams were glowing again, that same red pulsing I'd seen at the way station, but now they were also moving, slowly rotating and adjusting, building themselves into something more complex. "It's making itself into a building," the worker whispered, like it knows what it's supposed to be. I pulled free from his grip and climbed into my cab. Whatever the steel was becoming, it wasn't my responsibility anymore. I had an empty trailer to get back to Phoenix and another load waiting, but as I drove away from the construction site, I could see something rising in my mirrors. The steel beams had somehow extended themselves, growing taller and more intricate, forming the skeleton of a structure that hadn't been on any blueprint. By the time I reached the highway, it looked like a complete building. 3 days later, I got a call from my dispatcher. The construction company in Riverside was claiming they'd never received their steel delivery. According to their records, my trailer had been empty when I arrived, but that was impossible. I'd felt the weight of that load every mile from Phoenix to California. I drove back to the site to see what had happened. Where the construction project was supposed to be, there was now a completed building, not under construction, finished, like it had been there for years. A small brass plaque by the entrance read, Southwest Metalworks West Coast Office, Est. 1976. The same year Jimmy Martinez had supposedly disappeared at the Barstow way station. I walked inside, my heart pounding. The lobby was empty except for a receptionist who looked up when I entered. Her name tag read, Patricia Wells. Can I help you? She asked with that same too-wide smile I remembered from the way station. I delivered steel here. I said numbly. 3 days ago. A load from Phoenix. Oh yes, she nodded. That's how we get our new offices. Drivers bring us the steel, and the steel builds itself into what it remembers being. It's very efficient. I backed toward the door, but it had somehow moved. The lobby was larger than it should have been, with corridors stretching off in impossible directions. You did good work, Tyler, Patricia continued. The steel spoke very highly of you. Said you took excellent care of it during transport. I need to go, I whispered. Of course. But first, let me show you our driver appreciation room. We have photographs of everyone who's helped us over the years. She led me down a hallway lined with the same black and white photos I'd seen at the way station. Decades of drivers, all smiling beside their rigs, all looking slightly wrong in ways I couldn't define. At the end of the hall was an empty frame. This one's for you, Patricia said, pulling out an old Polaroid camera. Just stand right there next to that window. I bolted. Somehow, I found an exit that led back to the parking lot where my tractor was waiting. I climbed in, fired up the engine, and drove straight back to Phoenix without stopping. When I got home, I called my dispatcher and quit. Told him I was done with flatbed work, done with hauling steel, done with the whole industry. He thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. But 6 months later, I was working at a local warehouse, loading and unloading local deliveries. Safe work. No overnight runs. No way stations. No mysterious cargo that rearranged itself. Then one day, a flatbed truck pulled up with a load of steel beams. The driver was a young guy, maybe 25, eager to make his delivery and get back on the road. You ever run the I-15 corridor? I asked him. All the time, he said. Phoenix to LA, back and forth. Good money. Ever stop at the Barstow way station? His expression changed. You mean the one that's only open after midnight? Yeah, I've been through there. Weird place. They ask a lot of questions about your cargo. I wanted to warn him. Wanted to tell him about Patricia Wells and the steel that remembers and the building that built itself. But how do you explain something that doesn't make sense? Just be careful, I said finally. Some loads aren't worth the money. He shrugged and drove away, his trailer full of gleaming steel beams. I watched him go, knowing I'd probably never see him again. Not in this form anyway. Because that's the thing about the Barstow way station. It's not really a way station at all. It's a collection point. A place where things that remember gather together to rebuild themselves into what they used to be. And sometimes, they need drivers to help them get there. So here's my advice. If you're running flatbed through California and you see the Barstow way station lit up after midnight, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't slow down. Don't even look in that direction. Because some steel remembers more than you'd think. And some memories are better left buried in the ground where they belong. If you've got stories about loads that moved on their own, way stations that shouldn't exist, or cargo that seemed to have its own agenda, share them below. Hit that like button if this made you think twice about what you're really hauling. Subscribe for more tales from the road that'll make you question everything. But that's not where the story ends. 3 weeks after I quit flatbed work, I was stocking shelves at the warehouse when my old dispatcher called. His voice was tight with worry. Tyler, I need to ask you something. That last load you hauled to Riverside, the steel beams from Southwest Metalworks, you remember anything unusual about them? My mouth went dry. Why? Because we've got a problem. A big one. That young driver I sent out to replace you, Danny Morrison. He took the same route you used to run. Phoenix to Riverside. Steel beams. Overnight delivery. I set down the box I was holding. What happened to him? That's just it. We don't know. His truck turned up at the Riverside site 3 days ago. Trailer empty. No sign of Danny. But here's the weird part. There's a new building on the lot. Wasn't there before. Construction company swears it appeared overnight. The warehouse suddenly felt too small, too warm. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Tyler, you still there? Yeah, I whispered. I'm here. The police are calling it a missing person case, but the construction foreman, he mentioned your name. Said you delivered steel there a few weeks back, and something strange happened. What aren't you telling me? I couldn't explain it over the phone. Hell, I couldn't explain it in person. How do you tell someone that buildings can grow themselves from memory? That steel beams have consciousness? That there are places on the highway where the rules of reality don't apply? Meet me at the office, I said finally. I'll tell you everything. An hour later, I was sitting across from my former dispatcher, a man named Carl Hendricks who'd been in the trucking business longer than I'd been alive. He listened to my story without interruption, his weathered face growing more troubled with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long time. You know, he said finally. Danny wasn't the first driver to disappear on that route. He pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers and photographs. Started keeping records a few years back. Drivers who vanished, trucks found empty, cargo that couldn't be accounted for, all the same route. Phoenix to Riverside, hauling steel. I flipped through the file with growing dread. Photos of abandoned trucks, police reports, missing person flyers. Dozens of drivers over the past decade, all hauling steel beams from Southwest Metal Works. Why didn't you say anything before? I asked. Carl shrugged. Who'd believe me? Besides, the money was too good. Southwest Metal Works paid triple the going rate for those runs. I figured drivers were just, I don't know, starting new lives somewhere else. One photograph caught my attention. A flatbed truck from 2015, abandoned at a rest stop near Barstow. The trailer was empty, but there were scorch marks on the deck where tie-down chains had melted through. This driver, I said, pointing to the name on the report. What happened to him? Marcus Webb. Disappeared just like the others. But his wife called me a month later. Said she'd gotten a postcard from him. No return address. Just a picture of some office building and a message. Found a new job. Don't look for me. Carl pulled out another folder. This one filled with postcards. Dozens of them. All showing the same building from different angles. A modern office complex with large windows and clean lines. The kind of structure you'd see in any business district. But I recognized it. It was the building that had grown itself from my steel delivery. They're not dead, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The drivers. They're not dead. What do you mean? I stood up, pacing to the window. Outside, traffic moved normally along the street. Normal trucks driven by normal people, hauling normal cargo that stayed put and behaved according to the laws of physics. The steel doesn't just remember what it used to be, I said. It remembers who handled it, who transported it. And when it rebuilds itself, it rebuilds them too. Carl finished quietly. We looked at each other across the cluttered office, both of us understanding the implications. Somewhere in California, there was a building full of truck drivers who'd been absorbed into its structure. Not killed, not disappeared, transformed into something else. We have to warn people, I said. Carl shook his head. With what proof? We've got missing drivers and mysterious buildings. The cops would laugh us out of the station. But I was already thinking ahead, planning. The way station. That's where it starts. That's where Patricia Wells, or whatever she is, selects the drivers if we can prove what's happening there. You want to go back? Carl's eyes widened. Tyler, you barely got out the first time. I won't be alone. We'll bring cameras, recording equipment, backup, document everything. It took 2 weeks to put together a plan. Carl knew a private investigator, a former cop named Janet Russell who specialized in insurance fraud. She was skeptical at first, but the file of missing drivers convinced her to at least listen. I've seen weird stuff in this business, she said, studying the photographs. Insurance scams, staged accidents, drivers who faked their own deaths. But this is something else. We rented a truck, a basic day cab with a short flatbed trailer. Nothing fancy, nothing that would attract attention. The plan was simple. Drive the route at night, stop at the Barstow way station when it was open, and record whatever happened. Janet would be in the sleeper area with a camera, documenting everything. Carl would follow in a chase car, staying far enough back to avoid detection but close enough to help if things went wrong. I'd be driving, playing the part of another unsuspecting trucker hauling steel to California. We loaded the trailer with steel beams from a local supplier. Nothing special, just standard construction materials. But as we secured the load, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The beams were humming, not loudly, just a barely audible vibration that seemed to resonate through the trailer deck. Janet frowned, checking her recording equipment. Is that normal? She asked. No, I said, tightening the chains. Steel doesn't make noise on its own, but we'd come too far to back out now. At 9 p.m. on a Thursday night in April, we set out for California, 3 people in 2 vehicles, heading towards something we didn't fully understand. The drive through Arizona was uneventful. Normal traffic, normal radio chatter, nothing out of the ordinary. But as we crossed into California, the atmosphere in the truck cab began to change. The temperature dropped, even though the heater was running full blast. The steel beams on the trailer started humming louder, a harmonious vibration that I could feel in my chest. And the radio began picking up transmissions that shouldn't have been there. Record 1 to 9. This is Steel Horse westbound on I-15. Anyone copy? I recognized the voice. Danny Morrison, the driver who disappeared 3 weeks earlier. Janet was frantically adjusting her camera, trying to record the transmission. Ask him where he is, she whispered. I keyed the mic with shaking hands. Steel Horse. This is Flatbed Runner. Where's your 20? Static for a moment, then Danny's voice came back, clearer now. I'm everywhere the steel goes, Runner. Been driving these loads for years now. Best job I ever had. Danny, your dispatcher is looking for you. Your family. The transmission cut to laughter. Not just Danny's voice, but multiple drivers, all talking at once. Family's with us now, Runner. Steel takes care of its own. I switched off the radio, but the voices continued, seeming to come from the beams themselves now. A chorus of missing drivers, all talking about the joy of joining the steel, of becoming part of something larger than themselves. Jesus, Janet breathed, her camera capturing everything. How many of them are there? We found out at the Barstow way station. The lights were flashing as we approached, just like before. But this time, I was ready. I had witnesses, recording equipment, proof of what was happening. I pulled onto the scales, and immediately the voices from the radio grew louder. Not just the drivers I'd heard before, but dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all welcoming me back, telling me how much they'd missed me. Patricia Wells emerged from the office building, but she looked different now. Older, more transparent, like she was fading away. Behind her came other figures. men and women in DOT uniforms, all with that same vacant smile. "Tyler Reeves," she called out. "You came back. We knew you would." I climbed down from the cab, Janet's camera recording from inside the truck. The other inspectors surrounded me, their movements synchronized like a choreographed dance. "This time, you're staying," Patricia said. "The Steel told us how well you took care of it. You have a gift." That's when I saw them. Behind the way station building, barely visible in the darkness, stood dozens of trucks, old rigs from different eras, all loaded with steel beams. And beside each truck stood a driver, translucent, ghost-like, but clearly recognizable from the missing person photos in Carl's file. Danny Morrison waved at me from beside a bright red Peterbilt. Marcus Webb stood next to his truck from 2015. Jimmy Martinez, the driver from Patricia's photograph, leaned against a rig that looked like it hadn't moved in decades. They were all there. Every missing driver, every vanished trucker, preserved in some kind of limbo between life and death. "Join us, Tyler," Danny called out. "It's not so bad once you get used to it. The Steel takes care of everything." I backed toward my truck, but the inspectors moved to block my path. Patricia Wells stepped closer, her form becoming more solid, more real. "You can't leave," she said. "Not now. You've seen too much." That's when Janet made her move. She burst out of the sleeper compartment, camera in one hand, tire iron in the other. The bright LED light on her camera cut through the supernatural gloom, and the ghost drivers recoiled as if burned. "Back off!" she shouted, swinging the tire iron at the nearest inspector. The metal passed right through him, but the motion seemed to disrupt whatever force was holding them together. "The light!" I yelled, understanding. "They can't handle bright light." Janet swept her camera across the assembled figures, and they began to fade, becoming more transparent with each pass of the LED beam. Patricia Wells let out a shriek that sounded like metal tearing, covering her face with translucent hands. We ran for the truck, Janet diving into the passenger seat as I fired up the engine. The ghost drivers were advancing now, no longer friendly, their faces twisted with rage. I floored the accelerator, the truck lurching forward off the scales. Behind us, the way station building began to shimmer and distort, like a mirage in reverse. The ghost trucks faded away, and the drivers dissolved into wisps of vapor. We didn't stop until we reached Riverside, pulling into the same construction site where I'd delivered that cursed load of steel. But the building that had grown itself was gone. In its place was an empty lot. Nothing but concrete foundations and twisted metal scattered across the ground. Carl was waiting for us, his face pale with worry. "What happened?" The radio went dead, and then I saw lights. "We got it," Janet said, checking her camera. "All of it. The ghosts, the building, everything." But when she tried to play back the footage, the screen showed nothing but static. Hours of recording, all of it corrupted or erased. "The Steel," I said quietly. "Even after it's gone, it protects itself." We drove back to Arizona in silence, each of us processing what we'd experienced. The way station, the ghost drivers, the building that had vanished. None of it made logical sense. But we'd all seen it. A week later, I got a call from the California Department of Transportation. They were closing the Barstow way station, citing budget cuts and reduced traffic volume. The building would be demolished, the scales removed. "Funny thing," the official told me. "When our crew went to shut down the facility, they found it completely empty. No equipment, no files, no trace that it had ever been operational. Like the whole thing was some kind of elaborate hoax, but I knew better. The way station had served its purpose, collected what it needed. Now it was moving on, finding a new location where unsuspecting drivers would stop for inspection. Carl disbanded the steel runs after that, told Southwest Metal Works we were no longer available for their deliveries. They didn't seem surprised, just asked for a referral to another trucking company. Within a month, that company started reporting missing drivers. The cycle continues. Somewhere out there on America's highways, way stations that shouldn't exist, collecting drivers and steel, building structures from memory and flesh. And there's nothing I can do to stop it, because who would believe me? I went back to local deliveries, short hauls that kept me close to home. No more overnight runs, no more long stretches of empty highway. I sleep in my own bed every night now, and I never take loads that hum, but sometimes, late at night, I pick up transmissions on my CB radio, voices from the highway, drivers calling out positions and destinations. Most of them are normal, everyday truckers going about their business, but some of them are calling from places that don't exist on any map, reporting loads of steel that glows in the dark, asking for directions to buildings that grow themselves from memory. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear Danny Morrison's voice drifting through the static. This is Steel Horse, still rolling. If anyone out there is hauling steel to California, watch out for the way stations. Some of them collect more than just your logbook, so that's my warning to every driver reading this, every trucker who's ever hauled flatbed through the Southwest. If you see a way station operating after midnight, especially one that doesn't appear on your GPS, keep driving. Don't stop, don't slow down, don't even look in that direction, because some loads are worth more than money. Some cargo wants to take you with it to places you can never leave, and some buildings are made of more than steel and concrete. They're made of the drivers who delivered their materials, forever trapped in structures built from their own memories and dreams. If you've encountered way stations that don't make sense, loads that move on their own, or heard voices on the CB from drivers who shouldn't be there, share your stories below. Hit that like button if this made you check your mirrors twice. Subscribe for more tales from the highway that'll make you think twice about what you're really hauling. The road remembers everything, and sometimes it never lets you leave.